Most of you will know that the transport sector is the biggest emitter of carbon in the UK, responsible for almost a third of emissions. That emissions from surface transport haven't fallen in the last 30 years, and that emissions from aviation have almost doubled. So this is a big issue for a country committed to net zero. And a couple of years ago, I would have doubted that the Department of Transport would have any serious interest in bringing forward a Transport Decarbonisation Plan. But the consultation that was produced last year had a welcome change of tone and grasped the scale of the challenge. And I'm very much looking forward to hearing Rachel Maclean outline the government's proposals. Before I introduce the speakers, some housekeeping. If you'd like to pose a question during the event, please do so using the Q&A. You can, as it were, talk among yourselves using the chat function, but we won't be monitoring that for questions. Katharina Brandmeier, Green Alliance's Head of Climate Policy, will be looking at the questions, seeing which are the most popular, and then asking the Minister and the panel for their responses. If you'd like to tweet, please do so using the hashtag #GA-event. Now, we are still waiting for the Minister, who I will introduce in a moment, and hopefully she will arrive. We know that she was busy till 11 o'clock, and that her previous meeting has clearly run over, unless she's scared of all of you. So the respondents are going to be in the following order, and they're going to speak for about 3 minutes each. Bryony Worthington, crossbench peer and one of the instigators of the 2008 Climate Change Act, among many other things. We've got Stephen Joseph, who was for many years Chief Executive of the Campaign for Better Transport and is now a visiting professor at the University of Hertfordshire. And part of our unwritten constitution is that any event on transport and the environment has to have Stephen on the panel. So it's good to see you, Stephen. And finally, Greg Archer, UK Director of Transport and the Environment, and a prolific and excellent contributor to Green Alliance's blog. So do check out Greg's articles on the Inside Track. So the question I was going to ask the Minister, and instead I'm going to ask Greg, while we wait for the Minister to come, is can we get transport on the path to net zero? Oh, well, actually, Greg, I'm not going to ask you. Welcome to Rachel Maclean, MP for Redditch and Undersecretary of State for the Department for Transport. Rachel, I've done all the introductions, so I'm just going to, if you're ready and have got your breath back, I'm just going to pass over to you and ask you to sort of outline the government's Transport Decarbonisation Plan and answer the big question about can we get transport on the road or the footpath to net zero. Rachel.
Well, thank you very much, Shaun. Lovely to be with you. And of course, the answer is yes. But let me go into a bit more detail, and thank you to everybody for joining today. I think this is a really important event. And I want to thank you for hosting us and pay tribute to your 40 years of tireless work and getting successive governments to finally realise what you already knew back in 1979, that environmental protection and prosperity are linked inextricably. So your founder, Maurice Ash, was right to be optimistic about a green future. And in 4 months, we face a now or never moment. COP26 will rally the world to reach net zero emissions as quickly as possible and limit global warming in line with the Paris Agreement. Currently, unfortunately, the global community is failing, and we're on track to heat the planet by over 3 degrees this century. And simply put, that will be devastating for billions of people. There is still time for us to take our collective heads out of the sand. And to quote the UN General Secretary, the climate emergency is a race we're losing, but it is a race we can win. And in that race, in the UK, we are more than willing to be a pace setter. So look at what we've already achieved. We've grown our economy by 78% over the past 30 years, while cutting emissions by 44%. I mean, that does prove that green growth is real, and it is the surest way to secure our future. And we were the first advanced economy to make that 2050 net zero pledge. And that's why our 6th climate budget commits us to a nearly 80% reduction by 2035. Now, you might argue anyone with a calculator and a sunny afternoon can set targets. The hard work is meeting them, turning those words into action. And that's what we're doing. And the most obvious place, of course, is to start with transport, our biggest source of greenhouse gas emissions. But this is more than just a target. It will improve our lives through travel. Cleaner air can save thousands of premature deaths, and less congestion can create vibrant communities. A more active and healthy population will reduce pressure on our NHS, and tens of thousands of new jobs will help level up the country. And this is not about stopping people doing things, it's about doing the same things but differently. We will fly on planes powered by household waste. We will travel hundreds of miles in an electric vehicle that charged up while we slept. We will be commuting to work either on a zero emission bus or cycling on a street that won't look out of place in either Copenhagen or Amsterdam. And the pandemic, for all its disruption and devastation, has given us an opportunity, as working patterns change and industries rebuild, to put forward our ambitious vision for green travel. Yesterday, we published the UK's first Transport Decarbonisation Plan, which is a pathway to net zero emissions across the entire transport sector by the middle of the century. It's a world-leading plan, yet achievable. It's visionary, yet practical. And it is the product of years of conversations with business, environmental experts such as yourselves, and young people. And rather than collect dust on a white horse shelf, we will measure ourselves against it, publishing progress every 5 years. And in that sense, this represents the beginning, not the end of the journey. So let's start with road transport. We're ending the sale of new polluting road vehicles, all of them, from the smallest motorbikes to the largest HGVs by 2040. All new cars and vans will be zero emission by 2035. That's a huge step, because by achieving 100% zero emission on our roads, we'll remove the source of over 90% of our domestic transport emissions, which means switching to zero emission vehicles at scale. Many people are already doing that, including myself. We have over 250,000 now on Britain's roads. And in fact, ultra low emission cars have gone from accounting for just 1 in 30 to 1 in 10 in just a 12-month period. And that's a tribute to their growing affordability. And also thanks to £1.3 billion of government investment over the next 4 years. As a result of that, we've installed 25,000 public charging devices, including more rapids per 100 miles of road than anywhere else in Europe. The electric revolution won't just rely on government, but of course on the energy of business. And we've seen electric pledges from the likes of JLR and Ford just recently. And a few weeks ago, Nissan announced it would expand electric vehicle production at its Sunderland plant. And they will be building a successor to one of their best-selling electric cars in Europe, its iconic Leaf model. And that will be backed by a new gigafactory on site, the largest factory of its kind in the UK, servicing 100,000 vehicles every year and generating over 1,600 jobs. Of course, thousands more across the supply chain as well, which is a huge vote of confidence in the capability of the UK automotive sector. That's a sector that can thrive if given the chance. And of course, that's why we're investing £1 billion through the Automotive Transformation Fund to build a world-leading electric vehicle supply chain and help them transition. And these investments as well could create over 40,000 extra jobs by 2030, not only securing the future of our automotive industry, but of course levelling up the country as well, and rekindling that rich manufacturing heritage of places like the Midlands, where I'm proud to be from, and the North East. Now, of course, decarbonising road travel is essential, but it's not enough. Pre-pandemic, road traffic was predicted to grow by 30%. We need to reduce our car dependency. More cars mean more congestion, more pollution, and a more sluggish economy. With a quarter of all car journeys under 2 miles, there is a huge opportunity to do things differently. The pandemic has saw a meteoric rise in active travel. Cycling rose by 46%. That's the only transport mode to register an increase. And 1 million more people started walking for leisure. So we need to build on this and inspire millions of more active travel journeys so that by 2030, half of all journeys are cycled or walked. And that's why we've already spent £250 million of our £2 billion active travel fund on wider pavements, 300 new cycle lanes and safer junctions, giving people the confidence to get behind the handlebars. Having released 400,000 bike repair vouchers and delivered £18 million of bikeability training for children and parents. We know these investments work, Our Walk to School outreach programme prevented over 1 million car journeys, and just one new cycle lane on Blackfriars Bridge saw a 55% increase in cycling. These are local journeys, and we're giving local authorities the money, the guidance and the power to transform their streets to encourage and protect these road users. But of course, active travel isn't an option for everybody. That's why we're reforming and integrating our public transport network, investing billions to improve provision, lower the cost for passengers. Look at our vision for buses. We know that people who use the bus love it, but service quality sometimes feels like a postcode lottery. So the national bus strategy will change that. It makes bus travel the transport of choice, even if you have a car, increasing the frequency and reliability of buses across England through more turn up and go services and bus priority schemes. We want you to be able to travel door to door without stepping foot in a car and benefit from cheaper fares. So we're going to be building on the great work of industry and local authority, which has already seen hydrogen buses introduced in Liverpool, electric park and ride services in York. And we will, of course, be adding 4,000 new zero emission buses to our national fleet. We'll be introducing more demand response travel in rural areas where buses can be hailed from a smartphone, putting paid to the notion that you need a car if you live in the country. And for longer journeys, trains will be the natural choice. Recent rail reforms will bring back the trains under a single familiar brand, Great British Railways. That will ensure a net zero rail network by 2050 by continuing to electrify hundreds of miles of our track. Where electrification doesn't make sense, we'll be deploying battery and hydrogen trains. We've already seen the first ever hydrogen-powered train to run on the UK mainland. We can't overlook the importance of trains to rail freight. They are the only way to transport heavy goods in a low-carbon way. HS2, of course, will increase capacity on existing lines, and it will take thousands of lorries off our roads. And finally, this plan does set out a huge opportunity to develop and use low carbon fuel. So take green hydrogen, which we're uniquely placed to capitalise on, given our ability to generate renewable energy from offshore wind. It could soon power our ships, planes and lorries. The North East produces 50% of our hydrogen, and it'll be home to the UK's first hydrogen transport hub built in the Tees Valley region. But it's actually in aviation, which we've pledged to make carbon neutral by 2050, where the biggest potential of hydrogen and other sustainable fuels lies. I was thrilled to see the world's first hydrogen electric passenger flight take off and land in Cranfield last year, continuing, of course, our rich tradition of British innovation. Hopefully, within a generation, we will see the first zero-emission transatlantic flight, and that's the aim of the Jet Zero Council. That's a partnership between government and industry to develop UK production of sustainable aviation fuels. We're already making progress with plants turning non-recyclable waste into jet fuel. We've got those plants under development in Immingham, Port Talbot and Ellesmere Port. And these could be powering the aircraft of delegations flying out of COP. So I think the past 16 months have demonstrated that in the face of overwhelming science, we can make the changes needed to respond to a global emergency. 125 years since the link between CO2 and global warming was first discovered, future generations will wonder why we didn't act fast enough. They'll ask why we once thought the destruction of the environment, indeed our planet, was a price worth paying to travel. We know that transport is and always will be essential to connect, to do business and enjoy life. And today's plan doesn't change that. It ensures we can do more of it, to do it more cheaply, more easily, and above all cleanly, so we can live healthier and better lives, create new jobs, build a sustainable economy, and in doing so, obviously play our part in helping to save the planet. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed for that, Minister. There's an awful lot in there to welcome. But before I come on to the respondents, can I just press you on one point and one sort of possible tension in the plan and also the way it's being presented, which is, you say we need to reduce car dependency, we need to increase active travel, half of all journeys by 2030 by walking and cycling. But you also said this is about doing the same things differently. And I got a distinct impression listening to the Secretary of State and some of his media interviews yesterday that this was a carry on flying, carry on driving, everything will be sorted out by technology. Do you think the government needs to do more to kind of grasp the nettle about road building, about aviation expansion, about changes in the way we do things and say this really is about modal shift, and we're going to have to fly less, drive less, and change the way we live. Are you slightly fudging that?
I think so, Shaun, because if you look at the detail of all the documents that we released yesterday, not only did we release our Transport Decarbonisation Plan, but of course we released a whole host of other documents, including our Jet Zero Aviation consultation, which sets out our plans to work with the aviation industry and the airlines to get to a position of Jet Zero for flying, and also to set out how we're going to work with manufacturers across the board in terms of road vehicles, heavy trucks, for example, to get those to a net zero position. But I think, you know, to push back on that a bit, we've been incredibly clear. And in my remarks earlier, I talked about making half of journeys cycled or walked by 2030. And we've set ourselves a I think, very ambitious target backed by government money, the biggest investment in cycling walking that any government has ever made. And we've also said that we're going to hold ourselves to account. So we will be reviewing that. Of course, we do not know how technology is going to evolve into the future. It's changing incredibly fast, and actually much faster than most people give it credit for. So we do need to work with industry. We do need to stimulate those investments and those developments in technology. But it would be wrong to sit back and say that's going to solve all our problems. We must keep coming back to those analysis that we're making, and you'll see a huge amount of detail in the plan, but backed by the best scientists and the best of industry. But things will change. We need to keep coming back to that and to take stock of where we are. And if we need to change tack, then of course we must change tack.
Thank you, Bryony. And of course, if you put questions directly to the Minister, I'll let the Minister come back before moving on to Stephen. Bryony.
Thank you, and thank you, Minister, for your comments, and thank you for the plan. I'm delighted to respond. I obviously had a connection to the Climate Change Act when it was passed in 2008. And at the time, we were very hopeful that the government would start to use some of the powers in the Act to bring in the policy guidelines and regulations that are needed to harness private sector investment in solving the climate problem. And it's been a long time coming, but at least this plan is starting to use those powers and starting to take the challenge of transport decarbonisation seriously. So for that, I'm incredibly grateful, and I wish you all the best, and I hope that this will be a successful plan. Your comments at the start about where we are with climate change really resonated, and the truth of the matter is that everything we know about the science of climate change and the greenhouse effect has been known since the 1970s, and yet we've done virtually nothing to halt the buildup of those greenhouse gases. It's only really been in the last 20 years that we've seen a concerted effort by governments to decarbonise the power sector, and that's starting to bear fruit. But we've been incredibly slow to start on transport. So we've got a long way to go, and we've got to move now with pace. So my first question, if I may, is do you think that a plan that's being reviewed every 5 years is going to give you as a minister enough guidance as to what's on track, what needs to be adjusted, and what needs to be sped up? And shouldn't we get annual reports and progress reports against this plan to enable you to quickly react and respond, doubling down on the things that are working well and then unblocking the things that are not working well? So that's my first question. And the second question is, overall, you're setting goals to get to the net zero transport system, and the budget has been set for the first time, which again is a welcome development. It is, however, quite a generous budget. And I'm wondering, which bit of the economy do you think is going to pick up the slack where transport is currently over emitting according to your budgets, against the CCC's recommendations? So where are we going to make up the difference if transport isn't making its full and technologically capable contribution? My next point was really going to be just about the road transport challenge, and I'm really very encouraged to see the options being presented for a ZEV mandate. I think that makes a huge amount of sense. The industry will then have certainty, it will be investable against, and we'll see jobs and investments flowing if we regulate for that. And as you know, the powers already exist to do this post public consultation. So I'm really looking forward to that being brought in. I think within that ZEV mandate, you can do some really interesting things. California used a credit uplift to encourage cars to be developed with a longer range. And that's what drove Tesla into some of their innovative developments. When we think about our ZEV mandate, maybe we could be giving credits for the lightening of vehicles. Let's not have EVs as heavy SUVs causing wear and tear and being resource inefficient. Let's see if we can incentivize a new wave of innovation around the weight of vehicles and safety of vehicles. And maybe also we could give an uplift for the recycling of vehicles. It's perfectly possible to retrofit existing cars and vehicles into electric vehicles. That would be a really wonderful closed loop circular economy way of getting more EVs on our roads quickly. There's lots of jobs to be created, lots of skills to be developed. We're a little bit behind on other countries when it comes to this, but there's 1 million cars on the streets today that could be easily retrofitted, and there'll be many more. So could we give a little uplift into the policy that would drive that? I think it'd be hugely impactful. There's lots of other details I'd love to get into. Have a strong passion for shipping. I think we should be moving towards green hydrogen and ammonia for shipping as a world leader in that space. As you pointed out, we've got the excess electricity, we've got a fantastic grid system. We should be able to move into electrification and alternative fuels in some of the bigger, longer distance transport routes as well. I'm going to end just by saying, what else could the government be doing to really boost this? And I think please don't overlook the need for solid public information from the government on this transition. We've not seen a public information campaign from the government on climate for decades. It's how will you expect the public to come with you if you don't provide people with facts? We live in a world full of disinformation. People are gathering their information from all sorts. There are people actively trying to hold back this transition with disinformation. Please, government, can we have a solid set of public information campaigns that help people understand they will save money if they do this? These vehicles are cleaner, better for our health, quieter. Overall, once the cost of payment, they're much cheaper to run. There are wonderful tools out there that can help people calculate just how much they'll save if they make this change. So unlike other sectors where we're asking people to bear a potential extra price, this is one that should be easy to win, should be able to get consumer support for it and make that shift happen ever faster. So those are my requests, and thank you so much for all the work that I know that's gone into this. Thank you to the civil servants who've helped make this a reality, and we're going to be watching, and we really would like an annual review of progress. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks Bryony. Minister, if you answer all of those, there'll be no time for any more meetings. Can I just invite you to answer the point about the annual reporting, and then we'll move on to Stephen, if that's okay.
Well, I just want to thank Bryony for all that, and obviously to thank her for her incredible depth of knowledge and insight. And I have actually written all of those down. I think they're all excellent points. I'm sure that there will be pressure on us from yourselves and select committees and so on to review this much more often than 5 years. And of course, we will be doing our own internal review. So we cannot leave it 5 years. We will be continuously monitoring that. So it is a very good point, and thank you.
Thank you. Stephen.
Yes, thank you very much, Minister. And yes, thank you for the plan. I've appreciated being part of the board that's helping with that. I suppose just a bit of just as a backdrop, we should observe that we've got record temperatures in the western part of the United States, flash flooding in London and now Germany. Siberia is on fire. This is urgent and we need to do something about it. Against that, does the plan actually measure up? No, but could it have done? No, of course it couldn't, because this is a start. We need to, and I recognise that some of the pressures you're under, but I think we do need to have that urgency of action as a backdrop. Having said all that, I think there's some really good things in this plan. I like the wording on planning. I think that's the first time that's really been said. I would, however, observe I'm involved in the Transport for New Homes project, which is still doing site visits on the ground, and I worry that although there's some great wording in the plan, there isn't a commitment to, for example, revise the National Planning Policy Framework and planning guidance to actually make a difference. We are still seeing mini Americas with a lot of health and environmental issues that go with that. We see car dependency and new road capacity that's just creating car-based lifestyles and a lot of new housing. So we do need to do something about that. I know you're under pressure from going back benches on that one. The local transport stuff, I think, is really good. There is a question, I think, about capability and capacity on local authorities to deliver some of this. But I think that's good. And I really liked the commute zero commitment. And the reason that's important is, although, as you said, a lot of journeys, car journeys are under 2 miles, where a lot of the carbon is in the 5 to 25 mile area. And so tackling car commuting and increasing vehicle occupancy are really important. I think we need to see where the detail is on that. And the targets on things like rail freight are really, and infill electrification and so on are really important. I think there's some missing things here. I mean, as a lot of people have said in the comments and questions, I mean, there is still the road building programme, but actually, just carrying on building the old roads feels to me increasingly, the ones that were planned in the 1980s, feels increasingly out of kilter with the rest of the plan. And actually, I did a control F on Highways England, and it's mentioned once in the entire plan in relation to charging at service stations. And given their budget, actually, given that I feel the plan gives them a free pass at the moment. Where is the Highways England commitment to raising vehicle occupancy, for instance? So I think there's a really important story about roads, and about reviewing the roads programme properly and seeing where money really needs to be spent on that. But alongside that, I think there are still issues on demand management that haven't been addressed, and we need to nail down, for example, that very welcome commitment in the introduction on reducing traffic in urban areas and stabilising traffic more widely. And I think there's some really, there's a lot of work to be done on that. But those commitments are helpful, but we need to see the numbers on that and a consistency on spending. And finally, there's a pricing story, which showed yesterday that although rail is greener for long distance journeys, the pricing is wrong in relation to aviation. And also in relation to roads as well, and the document does talk about that, but we need to make it, the greener choice needs to be the cheapest and easiest choice. And I know that that's not in your gift, Minister, that's down to the Treasury and others, but I think that's, that will be matter. The IPPR issued a really interesting environmental justice report yesterday, where they talked to a lot of people in across the country for whom cheap or even free local public transport was seen as one of the most important things for an environmental justice approach and a just transition on this. So I think there's some good things in here. I think we await more detail, for example, on things like rail electrification and on some of the local transport work. And we need to look at, to get the demand management and the pricing right. And as I say, I think we need to bring Highways England in from the cold on this and make them part of the solution rather than part of the problem.
Great, thank you, Stephen. If I can just ask you a question, because it'd be unfair to ask the Minister this. You talked about the link with new housing, of aiming to build 300,000 homes a year. Is the planning system and the Ministry of Housing, Local Government and Communities, are they sufficiently clued into this agenda, or is there a sort of disconnect between DfT's decarbonisation agenda and MHCLG's house building agenda?
I noticed that the plan says we will talk to MHCLG about this, but it also makes the very important point that actually issues of traffic are one of the reasons why people object to housing in the first place. And for very good reasons, because actually that is what's happening on the ground. If you look at some of the stuff that's actually being built out there at the moment, it entrenches car dependence. There aren't local facilities, there isn't any public transport. They're what we've called cowpat developments, plopped in the middle of fields in the middle of nowhere. And there, in some cases, there aren't even pavements. Because nobody can agree who's going to pay for them, and that's got to change. And it's not clear that that the planning system is aligned with that. I mean, I think what that means is that the government's planning reforms are going to have to take this on and to give much more priority to developments, that are based around public transport rather than the middle of nowhere.
Great, thank you. Well, I saw the Minister making notes there, so that message will no doubt be conveyed. Greg, can I turn to you now, please?
Can I come back and just
of course you can. Yeah.
Responses, if that's all right, Shaun? Thank you.
Of course you can. Yeah.
Stephen, it's lovely to see you again, and can I just say how grateful we are for all your feedback and your careful reading of the plan, and some of which, not all, but some, was actually taken on personally myself in the rewrite process to make sure that we did. I don't know if you noticed it, but there was a slight difference between what you saw and what was actually published. And some of that was down to you and the other colleagues who took the time to review the plan before it was published. So we are grateful for that. And I just want to make a couple of points, if I may, on roads. And I think we have to be clear with people that we need roads in any imaginable circumstances. The clear majority of longer journeys, both for passengers and for freight by bus, coach, electric vehicles, electric trucks, will be by road, especially in remote and rural areas. But as I'm sure everybody on this call knows, the RIS2 budget is not just about building new roads. It is about enhancing, upgrading, repairing roads, which themselves has a beneficial impact on the usage of those roads, which has a good impact on the emissions that emanate from that. It is about supporting those roads so that they are fit for our decarbonised future. But I just do want to also say a little bit about planning, because Stephen, you are right to highlight those problems, and we have been clear in the plan. And of course, we will need to work through a lot of these areas in more detail. They are live issues inside government at the moment, but we have been clear that we want to work towards that 20-minute neighbourhood concept. We don't want to have the types of developments that you've just mentioned. Nobody wants those, and of course that's something it's not popular with anybody. It's not popular with MPs or local communities or local authorities. So we have said, first of all, yes, we do have a good working relationship with MHCLG actually, and we have strengthened that in recent times, and we intend to continue that. And I'll give you one concrete example. It might seem like a small thing, but it's quite an important thing. Every transport minister that's had this role since 2010 has tried to get new builds to have an electric vehicle charge point installed as standard. That's never happened. It will now happen. It will be legislated for. It might sound small, but actually I think that is quite significant. So, these are perhaps baby steps, but we need to keep building on those. And in terms of policy, the National Networks Policy Statement, that is the overall framework under which those individual schemes are assessed as part of planning. And we do think it is right now that we review that framework in the light of our increased commitments across the board in the decarbonisation space. So I hope that helps move the discussion on a little bit on some of those things.
Yes, please. Thank you, Minister.
Sure.
Stephen, we're never going to get through this. 30 seconds.
My point on roads was simply not just about RIS2, but about the kinds of schemes in RIS2 that some of which have a very long history and are not, I think, consistent with what the rest of the plan now says. Some of the very
yeah,
and that was the point. And I think we need Highways England to be brought into line. That was...
Thank you, Greg.
Thank you, Shaun. So my feeling is that this plan really is a milestone on the shift to a decarbonised and a much more sustainable transport system in the UK. But it is also very much only the first step. And there are aspects of this plan which are far more developed and far more coherent than other parts. I think in general, what you are doing on electrification of transport is excellent. Your proposals to shift away from diesel trucks by 2040 are genuinely world leading. I think only Singapore also has a similar commitment to fully decarbonise all of its vehicles. So we are really at the cutting edge there. And I think your proposals to introduce a ZEV mandate in order to actually deliver on your phase outs for cars and vans, and in the future, hopefully on trucks too, that is exactly the right policy mechanism, and it really can deliver the transformation that you're looking for at a much lower cost overall. Because what this will do is it will bring electric vehicles into the market much more quickly, which will bring those prices down to make it far more affordable and get them transferred into the second-hand market where they can be used by the less affluent. So this is a good policy for equity overall. I thought the messages from the Secretary of State that emphasise the co-benefits that come from decarbonisation, that it's not just a technocratic process, those were really excellent messages. And therefore, like Shaun, I was really disappointed when I listened to the Secretary of State on the Today programme and in Parliament yesterday, where he really played down a lot of the messages about the fact that we can travel better, we can have a healthier, cleaner lifestyle if we make less trips by our cars. But I'm glad that that was in the document. And I'm also really delighted that you have made the commitment to review the national network, national policy. It's a hugely important step in the process towards moving away from the road building programme that we've had in the past and moving towards investing in low carbon transport infrastructure, not high carbon. But there are some real elephants in this room as well. And in particular, I would say you still have no coherent plan to be able to decarbonise aviation in particular. The plan is excessively optimistic about the likely results of the ICAO CORSIA process and international agreements. You're still far too reliant on offsetting, and I think it's and your plans for a SAF mandate in aviation are actually much less ambitious than the EU's proposals that also came out yesterday. So I think there's more that you could be doing in that area. And I was particularly disappointed that you didn't take up the Commission on Climate Change recommendation for a moratorium on future airport expansion. And I'd like to ask you, when I've finished, why you chose to ignore that recommendation in your plans yesterday. I think that the second really big elephant in the room is the spending. We didn't really expect a huge amount of new money, given that we've got the net zero Treasury review coming in the autumn along with the spending review. But I think it's really important that the message gets through that you cannot deliver this plan unless you shift your spending very significantly away from high carbon intensity transport activity to low carbon. And that means building new rail freight lines. It means investing in bike and cycle lanes and not building new road schemes. So I would particularly ask you, since you are reviewing that national networks plan, will you suspend work on the really big new road schemes that will drive more traffic? I'm thinking in particular the Lower Thames Crossing, which is nearly a third of the RIS budget overall. So overall, I would say this is a great first step, but it is only a first step, and there are much more difficult choices to make in the future. You are going to have to reduce vehicle use, you are going to have to reduce flying, and you are going to have to reallocate spending, and all of those things are going to be politically difficult to do, but absolutely essential to deliver on what you want and we need.
Thanks, Greg. We've got 25 questions in the Q&A. Minister, if it's okay, can I just invite you to answer the question about airport expansion, and then I'll give you a chance at the end to come back with some concluding remarks.
Yes, of course. And I think, you know, I've made notes of everything that Greg said, and I welcome the notes of positivity and also accept the challenges. These are, let's make no bones about this, these are not easy. These are difficult political choices. It requires a huge amount of bravery to step into this arena. I think Bryony referenced earlier that various things were not done by previous governments, and we are seizing the nettle, but we have to take the public with us. And I think Bryony made a very important point about communication. We are at the start of a journey, not the end. There is a lot more to be done in this space. The conversation about the cost of driving versus the cost of public transport is not over. It has not even started. We have been clear that we need to have that conversation, but we haven't had it yet. So there is a lot more to do.
Thank you. Katharina, you've been looking at the questions. Do you want to pick one out? What I'm going to do is I'll address these to the Minister, but I might really quick answers, just pick one or two of the respondents off as well for particular ones. Katharina.
Yeah, great. So one of the questions that seems to be very popular, there's a couple of them around aviation. So the Climate Change Committee has indicated that both technology solutions as well as limiting growth in air travel would be needed to reduce emissions and limit the need for offsets by 2050. And the plan, as Greg has highlighted, focuses heavily on the technological solutions. So the question is, can the Minister comment on whether the government sees a role for limiting demand for flying if tech fails to deliver? And would it consider committing to a backstop framework for managing demand growth within the safe limits if technology doesn't cut emissions fast enough to keep us on track to net zero?
So I think what I would say about aviation is it does attract a huge amount of the attention. Obviously, it's a high-profile issue, but it is a tiny proportion of transport emissions. I think the figure is something like 1.2% for our domestic emissions. I can see people shaking their heads, but we're happy to sort of back up, have discussions about our statistics, and we're happy to have that conversation possibly offline. But these are DFT statistics. It is clearly significant. It clearly attracts a lot of attention. And one of the documents that we released yesterday was our Zero Consultation, where we talk about some of these knotty issues, and we talk about the issue of carbon pricing in there, and how we are going to work with our international partners and how we're going to work with industry. We have been clear that we do not intend to take a demand management approach at this time. That is not this government's policy. And I accept that that is a slight nuanced difference from the Climate Change Committee's advice. We have been very clear about our approach to this, which is not to take that approach now, but we have also been very clear about the end result, which we must get to net zero domestic aviation by 2040 and international aviation by 2050. We did take on board the Climate Change Committee's advice to include those international emissions from aviation and shipping into our carbon budgets, and they very much welcome that. But again, I would say that in this area, there is a lot more work to do, and a lot more to work out in terms of the details of how we get there. We have not said that this is a problem that we can solve by technology only. Clearly, we are at the early stage of this, but it is actually also right to say that I'm about to leave this afternoon and visit an electric aircraft that is actually taking off and operating. We have a hydrogen plane that is flying. We have brought together the whole of industry who are wholeheartedly backing our mission to get to net zero aviation using the likes of sustainable aviation fuels and technology. So let's not write that off. That is our approach. But as I said earlier, we obviously need to keep all of this under review. That the end result is not in doubt.
Thank you. Greg, come back briefly if you would.
Yeah. Minister, with respect, 1.5% is the domestic contribution of CO2 only from aviation.
I think I said
if you take account of the international emissions, it's more like 8%. But then if you take account of the non-CO2 effects, which you say in your plan you want to, it's probably nearer a quarter. So it is profoundly dishonest to be suggesting that aviation is only 1.5% of the problem. It's not. It's a much bigger part of the problem than that. And it's exactly why the Climate Change Committee says you cannot allow this sector to grow disproportionately in the future unless you put in place the measures which will bring the emissions down. And we can't do that quickly. The growth is far quicker when we can ramp up zero emission aircraft or sustainable aviation fuels.
Minister, I'm sure you intend to be dishonest. Do you want to come back on that?
No, and I actually, with the greatest respect to you, Greg, as well, because we've had these conversations before, I am not being dishonest about that. I'm using the statistics that have been provided to me by the DFT scientists. And I was very careful in my language, but if I have inadvertently misled anybody, I invite them to read what is said in the Transport Decarbonisation Plan. There were 9 documents released yesterday. With the best will in the world, I don't have every word of those in my head. I'm not Superwoman.
Thank you. Katharina.
So another question asks whether the plan puts the transport sector on track to meet the UK's 5th and 6th carbon budget in line with the CCC's recommended emissions reduction pathway for the sector, and would the department is the department planning to set clear interim targets for emission reductions against which it will monitor and report progress?
I think we've talked about a version of that question previously in terms of how we'll monitor and track progress. So I would just refer to my previous remarks on that.
And on the 6th carbon budget, is it that will you be matching the 6th carbon budget? That's one of the questions.
Yes. The plan sets that out very clearly. We've committed to take that advice on board, which was why we actually delayed the publication of the plan, so that we can ensure we did that.
Great, thank you. And Katharina, come back. Wasn't there a question about data sets as well? But anyway, I'll let you ask the questions.
I think perhaps it would be interesting to hear whether the DFT is planning to introduce also interim targets so that we can actually sort of by transport mode. But I'll also pose a follow-up question, which was one of the pre-submitted questions. It's very welcome that local areas will need to align their local transport plans with net zero and carbon budgets, but the risk is that there's a concern that even with the new guidance that the DFT will be developing, some of the less resourced local authorities might struggle. And the question is, what will the government do to ensure that all local areas are in a position to deliver on low carbon transport?
Yeah, that's a very important point, and we do talk about that in a huge amount of detail in the plan. We recognise that local authorities vary in their ability to actually implement some of these schemes. You'll see when we introduce our cycling and walking, our big summer of cycling and walking announcement, which we will do before recess, that we allocate £100,000 to each local transport authority to enable them to have the capacity, whether that's the resource capacity, the funding capacity to actually bid into some of these government funding pots. We see that across the board. We see some local authorities able to embrace this and implement schemes on the ground, and some who find it more of a challenge. That is a constant area where we are focused as a government, and we are making resource available to those local authorities, whether it's through guidance or funding or people.
Thank you, Rachel. You're obviously going to be under the caution of these events to a certain extent. I wonder if what can we as a sector, what can the NGOs and the environmental movement do to kind of shore up the good guys in government? And there's going to be some backlash from motorists, etc. I mean, how can we sort of improve the tone of the debate on all this?
I think the tone of the debate is fine. Look, it's always going to be an area where people have a massive spectrum of views. You know, we need. I think this government, and I would say that, but I genuinely believe it with all my heart, is that we have grasped this nettle and we have made enormous strides. But I don't think any one of us is under any illusions that we've done the job. We need to keep on doing it. Things change all the time. The environment changes, as Stephen said, all the time. The pressure is ramped up from every side. But we have to somehow square this circle of making this happen for everybody, not making it cost too much, not being impossible, and also doing the right thing for the planet, and also being sensible stewards of taxpayers' money at a time when we have unprecedented demands on the public purse. I think industry has a huge role to play. So I would urge you, with your contacts with industry, to ask them to continue to do the right things, which many of them are already doing. Ask them to sign up to our Race to Zero pledges. Ask them to do their own voluntary pledges and transform their own ways of working. A lot of this stuff we can't do as a government. So we can't make every single business change their commuting. We obviously can work with them and introduce guidance and all the rest of it, and schemes and regulation, which we will do, and we will move towards all of that. But we also need them to grasp the mettle and use their own innovation, their own creativity to tackle this. And I think that's vital. This is not about government doing this to people. This is about people doing it off their own free will, and us smoothing the way, and also these large organisations with big pockets also helping out.
Thank you, Bryony, and then I think we'll have time for one more question. Bryony.
Sorry, I just wanted to come back and suggest that when it comes to tackling some of these trickier sectors, of which aviation is probably the trickiest, the thing that DFT can also do is work internationally, and we do have the ICAO system, and we do have IMO, and I know that your diplomatic team will be talking to the other countries. So you've got COP26. You know, how can you talk about the need for international coordination on these challenges? You can't decarbonise aviation from just the UK alone. Can't do shipping either. So could you say a bit more about that?
I think it's a vitally important point, and COP will be the showcase for that. The work around the electrification of the vehicle fleet will be one of the highlights of COP26, where we are actually ahead of pretty much every other nation on the pledges that we've got, but we want other countries to come along with us across the board on all of this. We have a number of aviation campaigns as well that we want to get other nations to join us on making those net zero aviation declarations, because you're right to say that we are just going to see carbon leakage, and it's going to be pointless whatever we do.
Thank you. Katerina.
Yeah, so perhaps like a final question. So it's very positive that the government has acknowledged the need to review and committed to reviewing the national policy statement on national networks. But could the minister clarify the timescale for this, and whether the government is planning to suspend the sections during the review that are effectively ruling out climate change as a consideration when assessing new road proposals?
So I think there's a lot of detail in that. I'm afraid I'm not able to answer because I'm not a planning minister. And a lot of this is led by my colleagues in MHCLG, and it is, as I think I've referred to, it's an ongoing matter of discussion. But I think we have been clear, for the reasons that Stephen and others have set out, that we need to review this. We need to move to an environment where planning takes account of the need for public transport, and we've said that very clearly in the forward of the TDP and elsewhere in that document. That we are very, very interested in these concepts of the 20-minute neighbourhood, where you do not need to get in a car. We've been very clear that we need to cut congestion. We've been very clear that we want to avoid a car-led recovery. So I think we've been totally upfront about our intentions, but there will need to be a lot more work going on in order to set out the detail of some of this.
Very quickly, I think there's a confusion here. There's two things. There's a National Planning Policy Framework, which is MHCLG's and related to planning generally, and then there's the National Networks Statement on the National Policy Statement on National Networks, which is a transport one, which you said you'll review, and which governs road building and other things. And I think that was what the question was about.
Sorry, I didn't quite hear all the detail of the question. Forgive me.
And I think the question was, are you going to suspend bits of the current NPS on national networks that kind of discount carbon when thinking about roads?
So I think what I said earlier, Stephen, is I would refer you to the comments I made earlier about that. That is at the beginning of this work. We will need to review it, but I'm certainly not going to make commitments right now on this call before the work has been done.
Thank you. Well, it's obviously a discussion we can carry on having. I know Greg mentioned the Lower Thames crossing. I should declare an interest because it's a couple of miles down the road from me, and it's justified as relieving congestion and generating growth in the same breath by its proponents. So there are clearly some issues. We've got very little time. 30 seconds from the panelists, and then I'm going to come back to the minister. 30 seconds on what you would like to see in the plan that isn't there, or if you're of an optimistic frame of mind, the thing you love best. Stephen, I'm going to go with this first, and then Greg, then Bryony.
Thank you. As I've said, I really like the Commute Zero initiative, and I really want to see some more detail on that, and the commitment on car occupancy. But I do on raising car occupancy. As I've said, I'd like to see Highways England involved in those discussions.
That's great. Thanks, Stephen. That's it. Greg, you're muted.
Sorry. I really like the ZEV mandate for vehicles, but your shipping policy is stuck in the doldrums. There is no date for domestic shipping to be net zero, no inclusion of shipping in the UK ETS, no obligation on operators to use renewable fuels, and yet you have done all of these things for aviation. You should be matching your ambitions on shipping with at least with your aviation image and plans.
Great, thank you, Bryony.
I think I conveyed mine already. I absolutely want to see the public information campaign. Government's got to get the public on board with some proper facts, counter the disinformation. Yearly reporting, please. And I think you can do a lot with the ZEV mandate that makes it really truly innovative and makes us a home of investment and jobs. So please move ahead with that at speed.
And Minister, so you can say anything you want in conclusion in about 1.5 minutes, but if you were stuck in a lift with Rishi Sunak for 1 minute, how would you persuade him to pay for this?
Well, I mean, look, industry are paying for a lot of this. This is led by business because it is genuinely something that they are going to get a return on, and that's why we're seeing this wholesale transformation already from the automotive industry and others to fund this. Obviously, I would love to have a conversation with Rishi about the overall issue of incentivising the shift to public transport and making sure that driving doesn't continue to be too cheap compared to public transport.
Marvellous, thank you very much. Okay, we are on time. I'd like to thank everybody who's joined the call this morning. We'll put it on our YouTube channel, I think later today, so you can have the pleasure of watching it all again. I'd like to thank Bryony, Stephen and Joseph, and I'd particularly like to thank the Minister both for giving her first speech, but also answering questions so openly and indeed engaging so constructively with us all over the course of developing this plan. And we look forward to carrying on the debate. So thank you all very much indeed.